Disco Elysium is one of the most famous and most talked about RPGs in recent memory. I just played it, and it's pretty good. Realise I'm a bit late to that party, but let it never be said that I do anything on time. Like a drunk detective waiting 3 days to take down a dead body from a tree, I'm fashionably late. As a consequence, I knew a lot about this game before I ever actually played it. I've watched multiple people's takes and experiences with the game. It's a murder mystery, and I already knew the answer, which seems like a good reason not to play it, right? Well, I wanted to play the game anyway, experience it myself, maybe to see if it lived up to the hype, but mostly because I was curious what the game had to say about me. I wanted to know my copotype. Hi, before we get into this, I want to say that Disco Elysium is a very heavy game. We're going to be discussing things like drug addiction, alcoholism, suicidal ideation, racism, and the most scary thing of all, communism. If none of these topics sound like your kind of thing, best to turn off now. I won't be offended, I promise. Still here? Great. So, what is Disco Elysium? Disco Elysium is an RPG developed in Estonia by a bunch of people you've never heard of. You play as a detective with a severe case of amnesia trying to solve the case of a man hung in a tree. That is the simplest, most basic explanation of the game I could possibly give you. In reality, it's so much more than that. This is literally what the game is about, but it's not really what the game is about. Disco Elysium is about ideology. It's about communism and liberalism and fascism and what those terms even mean. It's about identity, drunk, cop, cryptozoologist. It's about morality, good, bad, what it means to be moral, what it means to be human. It's, deep, is what I'm trying to say. There are videos that give a more in-depth breakdown than me. I thoroughly recommend videos by either Noah Gervais or Sophie from Mars if you're curious. For this video, I wanted to focus on a very specific element: copotypes. Through a background system keeping tabs on your dialogue choices, the game eventually assigns to you a copotype, a kind of catch-all for your cop persona. Pick the rock and roll doing it for the action lines and you'll get superstar cop. Get extra nihilistic and morbid about life and existence and you'll get apocalypse cop. But there's more to it than that. This system is in many ways designed to reflect back at you, and it's one of the things that comes up a lot when reading or hearing other people's opinions about the game. It can be quite personal. In his video, Noah Gervais talks about feeling especially called out by the sorry cop copotype, how it echoed his own feelings of responsibility and worthlessness, how it echoed his attitudes and made him reflect on his own choices. It was that video especially that made me excited to play the game. I wanted to see what the game thought of me. I wanted to know what it would get me to self-reflect on. So, what does Disco Elysium think of me? Well, I guess we're going with that then. Okay, that's not technically true. The stats show I ended up with a somewhat even split between boring cop and superstar cop, although I'm not entirely sure where I got that superstardom from. Boring to me feels much more accurate, and it did prompt some self-reflection, though not in the same dramatic ways as some of the others might. As you may expect, you get the boring cop copotype by picking the boring answers. When presented with a page that looks like this, boring guy is the one who picks none of the above. Your character, the amnesiac detective, is a severely damaged man. He spent the last 20 years drinking his sorrows away, having wild party time, and casually chatting about ending his life. These are deeply relatable experiences, to some, but not to me. I don't drink. I'm frankly too young to have any deep, long-standing regrets. I've had my own issues with mental health, but nothing like what this guy's been through. I'm sympathetic, but it doesn't resonate with me personally. When the option in dialogue comes up offering a choice between proclaiming loudly how it's all shit and everyone's going to die, or how much it would be great to drink, these choices don't call to me. So I inevitably pick the final one, the pedestrian one. The one a normal person ought to say. Disco Elysium has a complicated to explain but simple to understand system where different aspects of your personality talk to you. You have a bunch of skills to put points into, like volition, logic, electrochemistry, and the more points you put into these skills, the more these thoughts will chime in. Or sometimes when walking around they will prompt you independently and you'll come up with long-term thought projects that take several hours of in-game time. The thought connected to boring cop is regular law official, which essentially means you're playing the game in the least creative way possible, just earnestly trying to do your job in a professional manner like a detective ought to. I was curious what other people thought about that, and I came across an article on Rock Paper Shotgun by Alice Bell titled "How Dare Disco Elysium Tell Me I Am Boring?" And I found it interesting because of our different interpretations of the word boring. She took this label to be an insult and pivoted her actions to become a more interesting superstar cop, where I initially took boring as a badge of honour. Hell yes, I'm boring. Yes, I am in fact doing the job with none of this mucking about. We're here to solve a case, dang it. As I got further into the game though, I realised that A, I was denying myself a lot of the more interesting parts of the game, and B, we were both wrong about what boring really meant. What Boring Cop really is a refusal to engage with the questions Disco Elysium wants to ask. The game is unapologetically political. Revachol, the location of the game, was 50 years ago the site of a failed communist revolution, the ramifications of which are affecting everything in the present day plot, including the murder mystery. You have conversations with socialist union leaders with plans to take over this part of the city. You have conversations with ultra-liberal millionaires on the back of their yachts. You have conversations with 7-foot-tall race realists sick of your degeneracy, and you have conversations with Gary the crypto-fascist. There is no avoiding the politics of this world, but Boring Cop represents an attempt to try. It's not centrism per se, there's a whole other thought tree for that. Moralism, the current ruling doctrine of Revachol, and something similar to the sort of status quo parties we have today. Boring Cop is a straight refusal to take a stance on anything, not just in politics, but on anything. Drugs and alcohol, vandalism, celebrity drama, relationship troubles, the existence of cryptids. It's conflict avoidance embodied, and that hits a little bit too close to home. So, you might not know this, but before I entered the current phase of my YouTube channel, video essays, media analysis, critiques, and after the Kyle Talks phase, which was more sort of reviewish style videos, there's a secret phase, a phase that's now privated. For all of 2019, I tried making political response style videos like Sean or Three Arrows. I even had the same sort of screen that Sean uses, 7 in total on a wide array of topics. 2018 was the year that I discovered what we'd probably call LeftTube. All the classics, ContraPoint, PhilosophyTube, Sean, H-Bomber Guy, and consuming all of this political content triggered in me what I can only describe as a political awakening. I suddenly got really invested in social justice type stuff. Feminism, trans issues, racism, climate change. I started understanding capitalism and the mechanics of the socio-economic system we live in, and eventually I felt comfortable enough to talk about it myself. Now, learning and hearing about this stuff is one thing. Actually trying to argue for it is a whole different thing, and I was not very good at it. Okay, maybe that's being too hard on myself. I don't think I was ever actually wrong in one of these videos, mostly because far-right YouTubers are extremely easy to debunk, and I still think I caught some of them in particular funny situations. But I was just not ready and not qualified for this kind of video. For one, I had a terrible habit of writing things in a script without checking that they were actually true. I just kind of assumed I would find the proof later, which is a terrible way to make any argument. I would make a comment in the script along the line of this coming from a guy who says stuff like this, assuming I could find a clip of Steven Crowder being a racist without actually finding the clip first. Like, I can find a clip of Steven Crowder being racist, but that's not a very good practice. The bigger problem, and the one that'll bring us back to Disco Elysium, I promise, is that I never quite plucked up the courage to actually call myself a leftist. Socialism, communism, Marxism, frankly, these words scare me. As you can imagine, that makes arguing from a leftist position pretty difficult. I ended up focusing most of these videos on social issues instead. Transphobia, feminism, one on Greta Thunberg, because if you'll recall, conservative media got real fucking weird about her a few years ago. I danced around an actual structural critique because making that kind of systemic argument scares me, and it's a fear I've never really had to confront until playing Disco Elysium. The ability not to think about our society, to not label yourself, is a privilege, and it is not a privilege that Disco Elysium provides. A storm is brewing in Revachol, and the case is at the eye of it. This case is no mere murder mystery, it's the ignition for a fire of different political factions across the city that was already about to burst into flames. There's 2 metrics in the game. There's your copotype, and then there's your political alignment, of which there's only 4 options. Communist, moralist or centrist, ultra-liberal or ultra-capitalist, or finally fascist. And what's interesting about that is that those are 4 extremes of positions. At the end of the game, I had clearly picked enough leftist dialogue options that Kim, your partner throughout the case, called me a raging communist who wants to liquefy the bourgeoisie, and it felt like a weird kind of call-out because I had specifically avoided the dialogue options that were that direct. I was a boring cop. I hid behind my job to avoid making any bold stances, and said some vaguely left-wing things when I felt they weren't too drastic. That kind of language, power to the workers, liquefy the bourgeoisie, eat the rich. It terrifies me. The idea of real, actual violent revolution, of being in a position where violence is the only option, it goes against the very soul of my being. One of the first times you have to make a political alignment type decision is when you're talking to Kim and he says something about the local union strike which prompts a thought in you. The options are as follows. We should ground the workers into fine paste and feed them to the pigs. We should ground the owners into fine paste and feed them to the pigs. With this little foreknowledge, I am unsure which side we should grind into pig's feed. The decision must ferment in me. Also, nationalism. I don't think grinding one or the other side into pig's feed will do anyone favours. I am really, really smart. That one is me. I aim never to hurt anyone. I aim to be nice and friendly and cheerful. I hate being mean to people, which I know is very un-Scottish of me, but it's the truth. And so the thought of enacting political violence in order for positive change, that thought kind of terrifies me. It's a naive attitude, and logically I understand that. I understand that the men at the top of these corporations literally choking the life out of the planet don't care about my feelings. I know the same about neo-Nazis or even just regular politicians. Why should I feel squeamishness about hurting them when they don't feel any squeamishness about doing it to me? One of the most difficult questions I've had to ask myself is, what would I do if the fascists won? I'm cis, white, straight, college educated. If the fascists come, they're not coming from me. So the question I have to ask is, would I fight anyway? Could I watch them hunt and kill people for not fitting their mould? Or would I pick up a gun and join the revolution? Or would I be boring cop, look the other way, thankful it's not me, and entirely avoid the idea of fighting because I'm too scared? I hope I would fight, I really do. There's an air of superiority in being a pacifist. Violence is beyond me. Violence doesn't solve any problems. I shall turn no one to pig's feed, for I am really, really smart. Your character, the amnesiac detective, has a deep nostalgic love for disco, the funky beats of the 1970s or the 30s within the universe of the game. In this case, disco is basically being used as a metaphor for simplicity. Disco music is one of the, shall we say, dumber genres of music. There's not a lot of deep, introspective disco music. It's dance music, plain and simple. It's mostly lacking in nuance. In the game, it basically represents what we've been talking about, a desire to ignore all the complicated questions in life and society and dance the night away carefree. However, it's not the boring cop who especially loves disco, it's the superstar. This is where I got all those superstar points from. Where the boring cop hides behind his job, the superstar cop distracts, makes big noises and funny actions to distract from the fact that he isn't actually doing shit. I've always had a rule since I stopped making those response videos, that I would never shy away from controversial or political topics. And I don't. I talk about racism, I talk about trans issues, I talk about ableism. But I've never committed to the big one. I've never committed to structural critique, to actually advocating for societal change. Disco Elysium is right. I know it is. The time when you can stick your head in the sand and ignore the realities of the world we live in. It's not just immoral to do that, it's impossible. In 2020, a black man was murdered by the police. He wasn't the first, he wasn't the last, but his death triggered worldwide protests for change. At the same time, a pandemic has been sweeping across the globe, undermining everything governments have told us about their stability and ability to handle a crisis. At the same time, we're well past the point of no return for climate action. If we don't enact massive sweeping changes soon, we're all fucked as the world rejects us for the shit we've done to it. There is no more ignoring the problems. There is no more disco. There can be no more boring cop.